Hello kids, welcome to this new science teaching online lesson. Today we'll talk about frog and we will see why do frogs say ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. Let's start.
Hi, it's Doug. Shh! Do you hear that? When I was young, I would hear this sound at night, especially in the summertime when it was hot during the night. And in my house, we sometimes would have our windows open. I got curious what this sound was. I asked my older siblings, and they said, "Oh, that's just the sound of nighttime." What do you think it is?
What is it, kids? What is it? Can you tell me? Is it? What is it? What do you think that sound was? Yes, of course, the sound of ribbit of a frog.
My siblings told me that this sound was just the sound of nighttime, but that didn't really make sense to me. After all, if you hear a sound, there has to be something making that sound, right? There's not just a nighttime sound.
Hello kids,
Like,
see you. I
maybe
hope
it was a
everybody
bird.
are fine. So today
So I asked my dad. He said, "Good thinking. You're absolutely right.
no
Sounds
animal that
always
exists."
do come from something." But in this case, my dad told me that this was the sound of crickets making little chirping noises at night. It turns out they make that sound by vibrating their wings together. Here's an actual video of one. Watch this. You see that? But one night, during springtime, I heard a new sound. This. I knew this couldn't just be the sound of springtime. Something had to be making that sound. It was off in the distance. It sounded like it was coming from the swamp at the edge of the woods behind our neighborhood.
Oh,
So I asked my dad what it was. He said, "This time, I don't know what it is, but let's go find out." I was surprised.
okay, we'll just wait a little bit.
Find out. I was surprised. Find out. I was surprised, and to be honest with you, a little scared. I said to my dad, "But it's nighttime. It's dark out. You want to go in the woods? By the swamp?" My dad said, "Sure. Don't worry. You've got me. Grab a flashlight. Let's go check it out." So we did. We went to have a look. We followed our ears, and sure enough, the sound was coming from the swamp. I shone my flashlight out over the water. At first, I didn't see anything. Wherever the sound was coming from, it was really well hidden. But then, I saw something. Two little spots shining back at me through the dark. I took a closer look at the shining spots, and I could just make out an outline. They were two eyes barely sticking out above the water. Those eyes were unmistakable. It was a frog. Now that makes sense, I thought. Frogs like to live near the water, like in a swamp. But don't frogs say ribbit? This frog clearly didn't. It made a high, trilling noise instead, like this. To find out more, I decided I'd try to catch it. With my dad's help, we caught the frog and put it in a bucket so that we could see it better. It looked like this. It was reddish-brown, with rough, warty skin, dark blotches, and a light stripe down its back. We had a book about frogs, so I could look up what kind it was. I learned that this one was called an American toad. Toad is the name we use for the types of frogs that have rough, warty skin.
Big
I
frog.
released the toad back into the swamp. And after that day, I started to hear even more American toads, all making the same sound from the swamp. They would get really loud at night. They sounded like this. Listening to all those frogs, I wondered, why are frogs so noisy? Why do they make sounds? Do you have any ideas?
Okay, let's start. So it's the video. Yes.
Far away from
Have you any ideas, kids? Why do you think the frogs were making so much noise at night? Why? Maybe they want to attract other frogs. Maybe they won't be scary for human. Maybe they want just to talk. What do you think?
Scientists who study frogs have figured out that frog sounds are how they communicate with one another, similar to how people talk to each other. Now, what would frogs be saying to each other? Scientists were curious about that. One clue they discovered is that it's only the male frogs who make loud sounds. They're calling out to the female frogs to let female frogs know where they are. You see, once a female chooses a male, they'll lay eggs together. Each one of these is a frog egg. These eggs all hatch into tadpoles a few weeks later. So the sound of the frogs at night is the sound of the male frogs calling to female frogs to let them know it's time to lay eggs. But now listen to this. This is the sound from a real pond, taken at nighttime during egg-laying season for frogs. Notice how you didn't just hear one kind of frog sound. You can actually hear lots of different frog sounds. That's because different kinds of frogs have different sounds. Some, like this American toad, make a trilling noise. But other frogs, like this American bullfrog, make a low, rumbling noise. American bullfrogs are the largest frogs in North America. They're so big that they sometimes catch and eat mice. Or check out this one. It's called a pig frog. The pig frog gets its name because the noise it makes sounds so much like a pig. Here's another. This is the gray tree frog. The gray tree frog has large, sticky toe pads that help it cling to the leaves and tree bark. Now, this might surprise you, but there's actually only one frog that makes a ribbit sound. It's called the Pacific chorus frog. I didn't have these growing up in Illinois, but I can hear them here in California where I live now. Scientists have studied the sounds that frogs make, and they figured out that each kind of frog has its own unique call. That means that when frogs are calling, they're only calling to frogs of their same kind or species. When a Pacific chorus frog says ribbit, it's only calling to other Pacific chorus frogs, not to American toads or other frogs. Having their own unique call makes it a lot easier for frogs of the same species to hear each other through all that noise. The different calls that frogs make can also be really useful for scientists. Imagine if you were a scientist and you were trying to figure out how many different species of frogs there were in a pond. What could you do?
How could you figure out which kind of frogs there were in a pond without catching them? Maybe you can just see and not catching them. If you wanted to compare the frog in two different ponds to find out which pond are more frogs, what could you do? Maybe you could go in the different pond and look and count how many frogs you can see.
In today's activity, you're going to figure out which species of frogs are found in a pond by listening to their calls. Scientists use words to help them remember different frog calls. You already know one example of this. Ribbit. That's the word scientists use to describe the call of the Pacific chorus frog. But here's another example. Listen to the American bullfrog. Some say that the bullfrog sounds like he's saying grum, grum, grum. You're going to listen to 5 different frogs. Each time you hear a frog call, you'll write down a couple of words to help you remember the sound. Then you'll use what you know to figure out which species of frogs live in a real pond, like this one. Just by listening, you'll know which species of frogs live there. We'll give it a try now. I'll show you how to get started, step by step.
Okay, please. So we cannot do the activity because we
Get
don't
these
have
supplies.
materials, but it's okay. We'll see some extra video and finish the lesson for today. So let's wait 30 seconds. Okay.
All right, here's a challenge.
So let's watch a video and finish with a sound, okay?
How a frog becomes a frog. I love to go fishing at the park near my house. There are lots of animals that live around the pond, not just fish. You see insects like dragonflies, butterflies,
Challenge
even
number
itchy
1.
mosquitoes.
Let's practice
And
to see
birds
if you can
and ducks.
recognize. Okay, are you ready for the answer? I
What
heard
are
wood
wood
frog.
frogs?
Challenge number 2
And
was
listen to the call.
a northern leopard
Listen again.
frog.
What frog is
Can you hear
calling?
them? Now, I don't know what words
Talk to
you
your
used to
group.
describe.
When I was there with my grandpa, I noticed a bunch of bubbles attached to a leaf in the water. Grandpa said they weren't bubbles at all. The tiny balls were frog eggs. Frogs are amphibians. They can breathe underwater through their skin. They also have lungs like people and can breathe air. When we got home, Grandpa taught me even more about frogs. We visited the pond all summer to watch what happens to the eggs. It's called metamorphosis. When the eggs hatch, the baby frogs sort of look like fish. They're called tadpoles. The tadpoles swim around the pond happily and eventually grow cute little legs to go with their long tails. Over time, the tadpoles' tails get much smaller and their legs get bigger and stronger. They still live in the water, but now they're called froglets. A few months after the tadpoles hatch from their eggs, the froglets' tails disappear and they climb out of the water. Now they are officially grown-up frogs. They spend a lot of time hopping around, but they like to hang out in the pond too. Now when I go fishing, my frog buddies are always there to greet me. Can you think of other animals and plants that change as they grow?
So what do you think, kids? Do you know of animals will change completely? There is not so many animals like frog and tadpoles. They change too much. But we can think about caterpillar. Caterpillar will grow and become a butterfly, so that it's completely extreme change too. Okay, let's finish with a song.
Toad, frog, pollywog. Toad, frog, pollywog. Toad, frog, pollywog. Salamanders and water dogs. They like to swim in the water. They also walk on land. They like to be wet, not dry, and they really like to eat worms, bugs, and flies. Toad, frog, pollywog. Toad, frog, pollywog. Ribbit, ribbit. Salamander, water dog. Toad, frog.
all of these animals are amphibians. So, okay, kids, is the end of the lesson. Have a good day. Take care of yourself and of your family. Bye bye.